Donald Trump just submitted his brief to the United States Supreme Court where he states, "Haste makes waste." It's an old adage, but it has survived because it is right so often. That's what Donald Trump's lawyers are saying as part of their opposition to Special Counsel Jack Smith's petition to have the United States Supreme Court hear directly the issue of absolute presidential immunity, which the Washington, D.C. federal court rejected and denied Donald Trump's motion to dismiss the indictment on those grounds. Interestingly, about a week ago, Alina Habba, Donald Trump's lawyer, was making her rounds on the various networks saying that Donald Trump and the legal team wanted the Supreme Court to hear this issue right away. She said, "We want the Supreme Court to hear this." When I heard Alina Habba, Donald Trump's lawyer, say that, I said, there's a deadline approaching on December 20th where the United States Supreme Court has ordered Donald Trump to submit his response to Special Counsel Jack Smith's request that the Supreme Court hear the issue of absolute presidential immunity right away. And I said, you know what? Just like all things, what you're hearing with Alina Habba right there is complete and absolute gaslighting. I said, just you watch. Donald Trump's going to argue that haste makes waste. I said words to that effect. More delay is necessary. That's exactly what Donald Trump is arguing. I want to go through Donald Trump's filing. First, let me play you this clip by Alina Habba from the past few weeks where she's been saying she wants the United States Supreme Court to hear this issue on absolute presidential immunity. Play the clip.
And I believe someone had called on the Supreme Court to do this exact thing. We need the Supreme Court to step in and stop this. This has become complete mayhem. And if they don't start looking at these decisions, and as the highest court in this country, as the arbiter of law, the ultimate arbiter of the Constitution, the people that are supposed to enforce our bedrock, if they don't start doing it, which thank goodness they are, we, have some law and order hopefully soon.
Well, of course, that's what Alina Habba says to the public, the same way she says Donald Trump's going to testify in the various cases. But of course he doesn't, because everything they say is a lie. I just want you to think about this in simple terms. Remember at the very outset when Special Counsel Jack Smith began this prosecution, when the indictments were unsealed, and what was it that Donald Trump and Donald Trump's lawyers were saying? We have a slam dunk absolute presidential immunity argument. It is a slam dunk case. Well, why would you say haste makes waste when it comes to the United States Supreme Court, where there are 6 right-wing Supreme Court justices, 3 justices who Donald Trump appointed? Wouldn't you want haste? Wouldn't you want the if you believe you have a slam dunk absolute presidential immunity argument, wouldn't the first thing that you would want if you were accused of something would be to go directly to the Supreme Court and say, we want you to make the decision. We appointed 3 of you justices, and the other 3 justices are right-wing Supreme Court justices, and then there are 3 appointed by Democratic administration. So wouldn't you think that you would win that argument if it was a slam dunk? No, it is not a slam dunk argument. In fact, it is a frivolous claim to assert that former presidents have absolute presidential immunity for criminal conduct while they were in office. The text, the structure, and the history of the United States Constitution proves that that concept is such the opposite of what our Constitution is all about and what our values are all about here in the United States of America. Let's just take a look at this filing that Donald Trump and his lawyers just brought before the United States Supreme Court. And again, just to ground you in the procedural history right here, Special Counsel Jack Smith did 2 things. First, he filed with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals for expedited briefing on the issue of Donald Trump's claim for absolute presidential immunity after federal judge Tanya Chutkan denied Donald Trump's motion to dismiss. There, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals set oral argument for January 9th. And then the briefing will be completed by January 2nd. Trump's brief is due December 23rd. Jack Smith's is due December 30th. Trump's reply brief is due January 2nd. Oral argument January 9th. Separately, though, Special Counsel Jack Smith went directly to the United States Supreme Court and said, Supreme Court, I know it's so rare for you to hear a case directly without it going through the normal steps. The normal steps, you have the district court, then you have the Circuit Court of Appeals, and then you have the Supreme Court after it goes through those steps. And the Supreme Court usually doesn't hear a lot of cases even after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals makes a ruling. But Special Counsel Jack Smith says this is just one of those rare cases that is so extraordinary, so fundamental to our democracy, where a former president is claiming absolute presidential immunity for criminal conduct. And with a March 4th, 2024 trial date, we need you to intervene right now. It's one of those rare cases where there's extraordinary issues at play, and we want you to invoke your authority on that basis. So what the Supreme Court did was they didn't grant Special Counsel Jack Smith's what's called a certiorari petition, meaning that then oral argument will take place. But they did grant expedited briefing, where they then said, okay, we are going to now ask Trump and Trump's lawyers, do you think that we should hear this issue directly? And then if you think we should, then let's go to the next step about whether or not we will grant certiorari, hear oral argument, and then make a ruling. So this was briefing about whether oral argument should even take place on the issue of absolute presidential immunity directly to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court wanted to hear from Trump's lawyers. That's where Alina Habba says, we're going to go right to the Supreme Court. Well, they're actually doing the opposite here, and here's the filing that they just made. And here's what they talk about. They say, they say, in 234 years of American history, no president ever faced criminal prosecution for his official acts. Until 19 days ago, no court has ever addressed whether immunity from such prosecution exists. It's not an official act to engage in an insurrection to overthrow the United States government. As the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals previously held in the Blassingame case regarding civil damages and the assertion that Trump made of absolute presidential immunity there, Donald Trump's conduct relating to the insurrection involves election conduct, it involves campaigning, and it does not involve Article 2 authority. And then separately, as Judge Tanya Chutkan held in denying absolute presidential immunity in criminal cases, she said there is no such thing as absolute presidential immunity for former presidents in criminal cases. And then Donald Trump goes on to say in this brief, this court's ordinary review procedures will allow the D.C. Circuit to address this appeal in the first instance, thus granting this court the benefit of appellate court's prior consideration of these historic topics and performing the traditional winnowing function that this court has long preferred. Indeed, the D.C. Circuit has already granted highly expedited review of Trump's appeal over Trump's opposition, with briefing to be concluded by January 2nd, 2024, and oral arguments scheduled for January 9th, 2024. Those were the dates I was telling you at the outset of this video. The special counsel urges this court, the Supreme Court, to bypass those ordinary procedures, including the long-standing preference for prior consideration by at least one court of appeals, and rush to decide the issues with reckless abandon. This court should decline that invitation at this time for several reasons. And then they give the reasons why. They say, first, the government lacks Article 3 standing on this issue to appeal from a district court judgment that decided all issues in its favor and thus does not injure it. I have no clue what they're even talking about there. There's clearly the doctrine here that the Supreme Court could step in on extraordinary cases, so just a bogus argument there. Then they go, second, prudential considerations weigh heavily in favor of allowing the D.C. Circuit to address this issue, in this case before this court, consistent with this court's ordinary review procedures. Third, the special counsel identifies no compelling reason for the extraordinary haste he proposes. Instead, he vaguely asserts that the public interest favors resolution on a dramatically accelerated timetable to ensure that Trump may be brought to trial in the next few months. In doing so, Jack Smith confuses the public interest with the manifest partisan interest in ensuring Trump will be subjected to a months-long criminal trial at the height of a presidential campaign, where he is the leading candidate and the only serious opponent of the current administration. Fourth, the case law the special counsel cites does not support his request. Fifth, the district court's ruling below was issued 9 days after the close of briefing due to the special counsel's insistence on a speedy resolution, and the district court judge had a hasty analysis. This is what Trump's saying in his briefing. This appeal presents momentous historic questions. An erroneous denial of a claim of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution unquestionably warrants this court's review. The special counsel contends that it is imperative public importance that respondents' claim of immunity be resolved by this court. That does not entail, however, that the court should take the case before the lower court completes their review. Every jurisdictional and prudential consideration calls for this court to allow the appeal to proceed first in the D.C. Circuit. Quote, haste makes waste is an old adage. It has survived because it is right so often. So really, all Donald Trump's lawyers are trying to posture here is for delay. They know they're going to lose before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. They know the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is probably going to rule sometime in mid to late January, affirming Judge Tanya Chutkan's order denying Donald Trump's motion to dismiss the indictment on absolute presidential immunity grounds. So what they're trying to do here, Donald Trump and his lawyers, is just delay, and then say, Supreme Court, you just wait, and then maybe you could step in and we could have a longer briefing schedule after the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals makes their ruling, and then maybe you step in. And as I said at the outset of the video, think about this. If you had a slam dunk way of vindicating your rights, and you've been saying from the outset, we are so confident that we have absolute presidential immunity. Not only that, you picked 3 of the judges on the court, and the other 3 are very right-wing justices as well, right? You got Donald Trump, who picked Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh. And then in addition to that, you've got Alito, you've got Thomas, and you've got Roberts. And then on the other hand, you've got 3 judges appointed by Democratic administrations. You've got a 6-3 court, and you believe you have a slam dunk argument. We don't want you to hear it. We don't want you to hear it. And then your other lawyer says that you want them to hear it. That just goes to show you all of the gaslighting, how you know that Donald Trump knows that this is a loser, and how their only strategy is delay. And you see that in this filing today, opposing special counsel Jack Smith's petition that the Supreme Court hear certiorari immediately. I'm Ben Meiselas. This is the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2 million subscribers thanks to your support. Check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.